Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and today's video is a very interesting one because honestly, it's something that never really crossed my mind. But despite all the Pathfinder 2E content that I've covered on the channel, I've never done any kind of formal review for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, which I find quite funny, honestly, because it's like one of the things people look at first and foremost when they're trying to get into a game. And the game, my favorite game and one of the core games on the channel, I just haven't done that yet because I was first making content for people who are already Pathfinder 2E players. But now that the TTRPG scene has been growing more than it ever has before, I think it's more important than ever to really get a review out. And so this is going to be my review for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, for most of you in my audience already, this is probably not going to be super relevant, but for those of you who are new, I hope this is an informative video that should give you everything you need to know to decide whether or not Pathfinder 2E is for you. And let's start from the basics. What is Pathfinder 2nd Edition? Well, Pathfinder 2nd Edition is a medieval fantasy, high fantasy, I should say, game. And what that means is the setting is more or less placed in a era of, not a lot of technology, even though there is technology. Like, the world average technology is something what you'd find probably somewhere in the 1600s. Now, there are places that are much more technologically advanced, and the setting has magic, which means that there is some kind of techno magic in some places, which makes places much more futuristic. Overall, it's a very diverse and dynamic setting where you can play as a adventurer. Now, an adventurer is a character who goes out on some kind of quest, journey, story, or whatever. And when you do so, you pick one from a growing list of classes that allow you to predominantly focus on fighting foes. Now, granted, not every campaign is necessarily so combat focused, but Pathfinder 2nd Edition is a tactical TTRPG that has very in-depth combat and a rule set that I won't say is on the high end of complexity. It is still much more complexity than some people might be used to. And while this game doesn't quite go as far as Pathfinder 1st Edition, which was a lot more granular with how its bonuses were set out, this game does offer a deep level of complexity. And what I mean by that is you get feats, and feats are like abilities that you get for a variety of different things. You get a feat for your ancestry, which means whatever race that you choose to play as has their own unique abilities that can be added to your character. You can get skill feats, which means the skills and professions of your character, like being a battle medic or the like, allow you to alter things inside and outside of combat, depending on the routes you want to take. And of course, there are class feats, and class feats are whatever class that you select. You can then, do better at what that class does. A fighter gets better at using weapons, and a magic caster gets better at casting magic. Now, Pathfinder 2nd Edition also has a not wholly unique feature, a feature that I think has been done the best of any TTRPG out there at the moment, which is its archetype system. The archetype system allows you to mix and match other different themes of characters onto your character to give you different kinds of abilities. Now, under the standard rules, these archetype abilities you select will replace your class abilities. Though there is a variant rule that's very popular called free archetype, where you just get a second set of levels purely for archetype feats. This allows you to play a fighter, for instance, who goes down the Beastmaster route, for instance, which allows you to have one or more faithful animal companions that are quite efficient in battle, actually, and it completely changes the dynamic of how you play the character. But maybe this is all getting a little too much, right? So let's go back down to the core basics. As of right now, there are 23 core classes in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, with 2 more on the horizon, and Paizo typically releases 1 to 2 new classes every year. Now, each of these classes do something very different. They have very key core component differences that make them unique from each other. The alchemist, for instance, allows you to concoct potions and elixirs, mutagens, or the like on the fly, so you have a tool for every situation. While the bard specializes in using their types of magic to give buffs to allies or debuffs to enemies, and they get something called their composition cantrips, which allows them to pretty much once per round for free give a buff or a nerf to an enemy through song, dance, or whatever. This still plays very differently from the druid, who gets abilities that make them better at using natural elements in combat. They're one of the only casters that get access to animal companions, for instance, which are like I said before, they're actually quite good and very proficient in combat, or they have a much stronger elemental focus than any of the other casters. Now, I will say that predominantly the game kind of separates each of the characters into 2 categories. There's the casters and the marshals. So a martial character, like a barbarian, a warrior, or sorry, a fighter or a ranger, are all focused on single target damage that really validates their role, because honestly, marshals are the best single target damage characters in the game, bar none. No magic caster can really keep up. The difference with that is magic casters traditionally have a lot of options they can do. They have a higher emphasis on area damage, and not only that, but casters just have so many tools for so many situations inside and outside of combat. Now, while every character kind of does this a little bit differently here and there, I do have to say that the kineticist is somewhat of a different blend from the other two, while not being a martial character, as its primary focus is not necessarily single target damage. Its abilities are very spell-like, and it focuses more on area damage, but they just don't have the same toolkit size as casters. So a kineticist kind of is the odd duck in the bunch. Every one of these classes here are very different and very unique. And actually, if you're curious, the website I'm currently using is Archive Anethys. Paizo themselves have officially recognized Archive Anethys as a resource for their game, where you can find all the rules for Pathfinder 2nd Edition free online. Yeah, that's right. Everything you need to play the game is available free online. Now, I will say that while Archive Anethys is really good, and of course it allows you to have a search function so you can find any role you're really looking for, there's still a lot of value in buying any of the many, many core books that have come out, as it's easier to use the books. They're getting better at organizing. I should say that the original core book, the legacy core book that came out for Pathfinder, was kind of garbage, not gonna lie. Its layout was kind of confusing, and I noticed running a lot of my first sessions, I had to do a lot of flipping back and forth through the book, trying to find very specific rules. Now, Pathfinder 2nd Edition is actually currently going through what's called the Remaster. The Remaster is doing a better job of presenting and organizing their information. The new Remaster book, for instance, Player Core and GM Core, are really good, as they have a much better laid out book. It's a lot easier to find information, and it's something that is a bit of a controversy. So let me preface this part here. Currently, we're kind of halfway through the remaster. Pathfinder 2nd Edition's remaster, while for the most part isn't changing much of how the game is actually played, and many of the core legacy stuff still works as intended, there are some changes, and there are some changes still to be made. So, that being the case, you can actually find the list of changes for all the classes and some of the other parts of the game as well here on the channel. But, like I said, it's only about halfway done. So don't be concerned if getting into the game seems intimidating, especially because we're halfway through a remaster right now. Most of the content, and you would see in the videos I made, most of the content before the remaster, well, it is still viable, of course, but also plays pretty much the same. They just changed some names here and there. That's due to the OGL debacle. There's plenty of videos of that on the channel as well. If you want to keep up on this information and if you want to see the new information as it comes out, I recommend subscribing to the channel. It lets you see my content, or hopefully anyway, more easily, and you can see I do, early review material. I do all kinds of stuff on Pathfinder 2nd Edition. If you want to get into the game or are interested, it's not a bad resource to have. And if you like the video, I'd appreciate it, as it helps other people see this kind of content. All right, now that we've talked about the general gists of what Pathfinder 2nd Edition is, let me give you some of my actual opinions. Now, I will say straight up, Pathfinder 2nd Edition, as of right now, is my current favorite TTRPG. So, obviously some of my opinions on it might be biased, but I genuinely think that what Paizo has done with this game has been really good, revolutionary even. It's a very solid and well-defined system, and I think it does exactly what you want it to do. If you want to play a high fantasy game with your friends that has and admittedly a very high power scaling, like your characters are very, very strong at the end, like demigod level characters, then this is the game for you. But if you're not interested in games, or if you want games that are a little bit grittier, that have a little bit more struggle, while I say that Pathfinder does offer some variants of rules that allow this to happen, you're probably better off looking into like the OSR or a lot of other of the much more traditional style, like closer to AD&D style of games. And that's completely fine, honestly. If a high fantasy game with all kinds of magic and superhuman feats is not what is up your alley, that's completely fine. But if you want a game that's very dynamic, that rewards strategic play, and also just gives you the ability to make so many different kind of characters, well, I think Pathfinder 2nd Edition is the game for you. It's a game that's been growing in popularity, obviously, and due to that, more and more resources and material are becoming available, which is a big difference from the early heydays of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And let's talk about the strategy. It's something I mentioned several times. As far as strategic games go, I would rate Pathfinder pretty high. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would rate it about a 8 on the scale. It's incredibly strategic. Where you position yourself, what you do on your turns, working with your team, all incredibly matter. A group's level of power exponentially increases based on everyone's proficiency with the system. How good you are at the game will make your encounters easier and easier, or allow you to take on much more difficult encounters, which I think is very rewarding as a style of play. And I did say this before, but the level of customization in this game is unreal. With the so many of the classes, the well over 200 archetypes that you can slap onto your character to change how they fundamentally play. And not only that, but the fact that most classes offer not only just like aesthetic and some slight mechanical plays, but also have different styles of gameplay. Like you just play the game very differently. It's really rewarding. On top of that, with the, I think, 30 plus ancestries and heritages that are in the game, which heritages allow you to essentially splice in a little bit of something else into your core ancestry. I mean, it's really good. There's also the backgrounds, which are not a big part of the game, but they do offer some slight bonuses at character creation nonetheless. There's just so many routes you can take this, and multi-classing is actually baked into the archetype system. So when you get an archetype, you can take a multi-class archetype, meaning that if you want to play a fighter who has a spell book and uses spells like a wizard does, you can do so. While you won't be as good as a wizard who does that, you will actually still find a lot of proficiency. You'll get a lot of the same kinds of features, and most of the spell slots that a wizard would have if you invest enough into it. Like, you can give as much power to a multi-class archetype as possible to make a more close, like, 50-50 blend between two classes while still maintaining the core elements of your class. Something that I very much dislike in some games where multi-classing is sacrificing levels from my initial idea to add a little something different to it. Pathfinder, you don't have to give up any of your initial class power to do a little bit of multi-classing, which I think works out really, really well. Now, the art in the games, as you can see here behind me, are really good. A lot of the iconic characters are shown doing really cool things. The art in the books are really, really good, and if you've seen any of the new covers, I mean, Paizo has a really crack team of artists making very imaginative and inspirational art for your games. And in addition to the art, the book layouts have gotten, as I said before, really good. So if it's navigation, I would probably give Paizo like a 7 out of 10 for its general navigation of its books. Now, the core Legacy book, obviously not the case, but with the new direction, it's really easy to find everything. It's not perfect, and I definitely have seen some games who do it better. But for the most part, it works really well, and it's a lot better than you see sometimes in the TTRPG scene. Let's talk character progression. So how do your characters progress and what have you? Well, this is like any other kind of RPG. One of the major ways you gain XP is through fighting enemies, going through encounters. Though, of course, you can get XP for doing certain story events. If you played any kind of CRPG or any kind of general RPG that does experience, well, it's pretty much the same thing. Character progression is pretty linear, and I would say that Pathfinder's is actually pretty fast. A character level up typically can take 5 sessions, give or take. So, like, a standard encounter has between 40 and 60 XP in it, and that's on the lower end, with advanced combats getting over 100 XP. A character needs 1,000 XP per level up. Now, of course, you get XP based on the level difference between you and the enemy. So the stronger you are, the less XP the enemies have. But the stronger the enemies are, the more XP you can possibly gain, at the risk of possibly dying. With the average being somewhere around 50 XP, that means you need to have about 20 encounters to level up. Now, it's probably less than that more often than not because you're going to have like a boss encounter with over 100 XP, which is more than double of what you normally get. So, less than 20 encounters. If you do 1 to 2 encounters per session, you're likely to level up somewhere around 5-6 sessions, give or take. That's pretty fast, and for groups that like to take a little bit of a slower pace, this might be a little excessive. Now, they do have variant rules that do extend this a little bit, and you can set whatever goals you want. You can do capstone if you really wanted to. But for me personally, I do like the faster XP growth. It makes it so that on average, your characters are leveling up once a month or so, maybe actually a little longer, like once every other month or so, if you're playing weekly, like we do most of the time. And I think that's a pretty fair pace. But if you want more of a slow grind, if you want to really feel each of your levels, while you could adjust this game definitely has a faster pace. And speaking also on progression, magic items are actually included as a part of the progression. Some people like this and some people don't like this. Obviously, it's up to you whether or not you think getting gear is relevant to how powerful your character should or should not be. This game has a very structured method, though, of giving bonuses out to players and getting magic items out to players. And the magic gear in this game is pretty good, honestly. I thoroughly enjoy it. There's tons of different magic items, different kinds of consumables, potions. I mean, if you can look here on Archive and Nethys, you can see all the various different equipment tabs that they have. And you can see right here that there are 4,582 results under all equipment, which is a lot of gear. It can be honestly a bit intimidating. And talking about gearing, one thing I actually don't like about Pathfinder too much is a lot of the magic items that you can find, like magic weapons or whatever, have some really cool effects, but they don't scale with you. So oftentimes when you find a really good magic item, you'll outscale it in 2 to 3 levels. I've done some homebrew to kind of get around this, and it works out just fine, but it's something that I do think is a bit of a problem in the game, honestly. And if I'm going to say what the gearing situation is, I would give Pathfinder 2E's gearing situation like a 5 out of 10. 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10, somewhere in that range. It's good, but I feel like a lot of the cool items you get really fall off, and that feels kind of bad. And because it's necessary to gain new equipment as you level up, because that's part of how they kind of do their algorithms for encounter design, it can feel stressful as the GM to really keep giving gear to your players, keep looking. And when you're trying to make a loot table, oh my goodness, that's incredibly difficult because there's so many items. A lot of the items are really cool, and I do think Pathfinder has really good items. But how it's set up, how some of the items just don't scale with you and all that kind of stuff, I have to kind of give us this kind of middle of the road rating. It's not great, and my most charitable I can give is a 6. It is what it is, unfortunately. I like this game a lot, but it's one of the weak points I feel in the system. Now, this next section here is going to vary on your interest or desire for it, but let's talk about diversity and Paizo's kind of goal to make sure as many groups of people are heard as possible. Pathfinder 2nd Edition, Paizo definitely has a lot of diversity, not only in its characters and, you know, important characters and locations in the books, but also in its staff. And so it's a game that definitely has a very strong focus on validating as many styles of play as possible. Now, while the rulebook doesn't necessarily come out and say to you how to play your games, which is something I definitely appreciate, it definitely gives a lot of proper representation to different types of people. It's one of the things that honestly makes Paizo really big for a lot of different groups of individuals, and I think it's mostly good. Not only that, but you get a lot of very interesting viewpoints, like their Mwangi Expanse book that has a lot of people of, you know, Black or African descent who were big writers on the project and gave their perspective to the book. And honestly, going through that book and reading through, it was a really good book, and it got a lot of very interesting viewpoints and different styles of character ideas and all kinds of fun stuff. Like, honestly, it's something that I think makes the system stronger overall. But I do need to say that it is something that if you're not comfortable with diversity for whatever reason, you know, that's something you might want to consider when getting into the game. I want as many people to play Pathfinder 2nd Edition as possible, and I want everyone who plays the game to be happy and as comfortable as possible. And while Paizo has done a pretty good job overall of making the space a bit safer, that's something that some people don't want. Some people want a grittier, kind of harsher system. They want something that feels a little bit more aggressive, I should say. And for that, I'm going to say that this system doesn't really offer much of that for you. It's not a game that's really meant for social hardships, you know, in that kind of way, or to really go into the moral corruptness of sentient species, you know, whether you're talking about humans or whatever. And so, again, this game might not be for those kinds of people. Granted, you can do that kind of stuff in Pathfinder still. I'm just saying that there's no material offered for you for it. Like, if you want to talk about hard issues, if you want to have very like traumatic experiences in your games with player consent, of course, then that's something you can just do already. I'm just saying that Pathfinder doesn't really offer that, and instead chooses to create a safer space without being overly preachy about it. So, as far as diversity and creating a space that people can enjoy the game without having to worry about any real problems with diversity, whatever, I'll give Paizo a 8 out of 10. It's really, really good. It doesn't go so far progressive that it's off-putting, but at the same time, they definitely are listening. They definitely have lots of queer, whatever, staff, you know, different ethnicities, whatever. so that everyone's voices are heard, and I think it's overall a good thing. But, the weird people out there who don't like that kind of stuff, well, now you have it. All right, last I'll talk about its general complexity. Pathfinder 2nd Edition is a D20 game that allows you to add bonuses to your rolls. Now, the bonuses start off pretty small. On average, your beginning bonuses are somewhere in the range of +6, +7 to whatever checks you're doing, but they do get up to eventually like +30 on what you're doing. Not only that, but the game does offer a variety of bonuses and penalties that kind of go into 3 categories. And so you have 3 different variable numbers in each direction that can combine together to make whatever. Typically, what a standard combat situation will look like in the game is you're flanking an enemy with your ally. The enemy has a -2 to its AC, and that's it. That's the big difference between you and your ally. Now, if your ally is aiding you, you can get a +2, +3, even +4 sometimes to your roll. Your item that you're using might give you an item bonus, which can give you an additional, between 1 and 3. And then you might be under the effects of a spell, which is a status bonus, which typically gives 1, 2, sometimes 3, very rarely 4 points. So it's a little extra math. But once you play it a few times, I mean, there's some live plays here on the channel that you can see how the game is played. It's not typically that much. Like I said, your average combat situation is you're flanking with your ally. The enemy has a penalty to their AC. That's the big difference. You might get a bonus or 2, but at most you're adding +3 to your check. And that's actually considered really, really good. So it's not very big numbers, but it's numbers coming from a bunch of sources. And it does have a lot of complexity. On top of that as well, the game uses a trait system that allows different features to kind of interact with each other. For instance, the kineticist class I mentioned before gets certain traits that give them resistances to things like water. Well, water isn't a damage type, but certain creatures or spells have the water trait, which means the kineticist typically will gain resistance to their damage. And this exists for a lot of variety of things. Not only that, but weapons are very diverse and very interesting in this game because they also come with traits that allow them to function differently. This game actually rewards the use of different kinds of weapons or items for different situations. If you have a sweep weapon, for instance, you get a bonus when attacking enemies who are multiple enemies who are, within your range. Or if you have forceful, you do extra damage when you attack the same enemy multiple times. Agile weapons makes your second and third attacks have less of a multi-attack penalty. And finesse allows you to use your dexterity when calculating your strike rather than strength, though strength is typically still used for damage. This is a somewhat complex system. Not the most complex system, like Shadowrun, for instance, I would say is way above. I would give Pathfinder 2E's general complexity a 7 out of 10. It's definitely an in-depth game. It has a lot of chunk to it in certain areas. I still feel it's rather approachable. But if you're more interested in games that offer smaller numbers or don't have nearly as complex maths that kind of go into it, then, that's just something to consider as well. It is a complex game. I'm not gonna lie here. It's a complex game, but it's a game that's very rewarding if you enjoy complexity, which I find is why I particularly like it. So that being the case, now you know. Oh, let me end off this review with one final statement. The balance in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is unparalleled. This game is really well designed. It offers character power to all types of characters. There's not really a super strong meta because combats can vary, different types of enemies, most characters and most classes are really, really viable. In fact, it's a struggle to create a bad character in the game. And while there are indeed optimal ways to play in some situations, they are not all encompassing. There are definitely tons of different combat situations where there's not really necessarily a meta. The algorithm and the math that went into this game, encounter design and the like, are groundbreaking, I feel, in the TTRPG scene. So if you enjoy a game of balance, I mean, I'm going to give Pathfinder's level of balance a 10 out of 10. It's really good. It's so good that it even beats like games that are very balanced to the point of homogeny, where nothing you do really matters because everything kind of balances out the same anyway. This game goes beyond that by just offering diversity in different types of levels of success in different areas of combat or in out of combat or the like. Every character has value in this game, and Pathfinder really emphasizes the use of teamwork, which means that a group of diverse players are going to have more success in a very meta run build of characters, which I think is really good. So for balancing purposes, it's a 10 out of 10. And there you go. That is the review. You know, not as in depth maybe as my Candela Obscura review was the other time, but to be fair, I could do a review and a guide in 40 minutes. So I mean, being probably about 10 minutes longer than this video, that's not bad. If I want to do the same thing with Pathfinder, it'd be a 2-hour video, which I don't think anyone is interested in for a review. Pathfinder is my favorite TTRPG. It is the right level of chunkiness and strategic that I enjoy in tabletop. It offers a wide variety of choices. I'm endlessly making characters. I mean, I can tell you about all the characters I have in store right now, and this video would go on forever. It's just, there's so many really cool options. I enjoy personally high fantasy, so, you know, I really like this kind of game. And yeah, I'm the kind of player who really enjoys good, in-depth narrative games that have a good amount of heft and mechanic behind it to back it up. And this game is exactly that. It's my favorite game. So while I'm not going to give the game necessarily a rating, as I feel like I have too much of a bias to really do so, I will say that it's my favorite for a reason. And if another came out that was better, I would like that game better. Plain and simple. I mean, I've played a lot of different tabletop over the 20 years I've been doing tabletop, and Pathfinder just hits a lot of the right marks for me, which is why I've dedicated a good chunk of my channel to it. Like I said, hopefully this video was helpful to y'all. If there's anything else you guys want to know about the system, please go down into the comments and ask me. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions to the best that I can with how busy I've been. And honestly, if you don't like Pathfinder 2nd Edition for whatever reason, that's completely valid. I'm not going to say everyone should play Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Play what games you enjoy. Just because it's my favorite doesn't mean that we have the same values for different elements of TTRPGs, obviously. So if you didn't like this game or you don't like this review, I think that's fair too. The world is made of different viewpoints and perspectives after all. But you know, if you do have any problems, questions, or the like I said, you can ask them down in the comments below. But that's gonna be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.